If you have been following the Lucy Letby case, then you will know that those who believe in the verdicts have raised doubts that she will waive legal privilege. Lawyer Mark Mcdonald recently gave a response to that idea in an interview with the Guernsey magazine. In my opinion, that potentially ties in with the topic of Cheshire Police being referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct and a potential strategy for waiving legal privilege. So first, reading through the Guernsey article describing what Mark Mcdonald said about waiving legal privilege. Quote, "Privilege is a complex area. Every conversation you have with your lawyer remains confidential and nobody else is allowed to see it. She never said, by the way, I did it, but don't tell anyone. But there would have been conversations that she had throughout the many years that she was being represented, which the prosecution would be allowed access to by waiving privilege." The police issued another press statement and they have sent a file to the prosecution because they want her prosecuted for more murders. If privilege is waived, they're going to have access to every single conversation she's ever had with her lawyers. You know what they did with her Facebook searches and with the text message conversation she had with another doctor. Can you imagine if they had access to every single conversation that she's ever had with her lawyers, all there in front of them? How that could be used against her. If there's an inconsistency in something that she said 4 years ago and has changed her mind in whatever way it may be, that's your area of concern when it comes to waiving legal privilege. That is something that is under discussion continuously, but while the police and prosecution are threatening her, which is what they've done, deliberately releasing it to the media, deliberately telling the Daily Mail that they're looking at charging her for more murders, in her position, would you waive privilege? So there's a clear suggestion there that police and prosecutors are going to jump on anything they can and try to twist it against Lucy Letby. I don't think it would be that surprising to think prosecutors would do that. Although it is possible for them to cross ethical lines, they are hired on the basis that they are advocates. The suggestion that the police would twist the facts any way they could is a bit more outlandish. The police, on paper, are supposed to be impartial investigators. However, to those who take a cynical view of the police in general, and to those who have followed this case specifically, the idea that Cheshire Police are now working to preserve the image and reputation of the police force, in their minds the best way they can, rather than to work to uncover the truth of the case, the idea that they are desperate to jump on any mud they can fling at Lucy Letby is not that outlandish. If you look around on social media, many people have raised concerns with this police force's handling of the case, and I've seen several people say they have sent complaints. The most serious and credible suggestion of a police conduct referral that I've seen comes from Dr. Svelena Dimitrova, Specialist Neonatology Advisor to the Care Quality Commission, and it relates to this needle insertion.
The needle perforated the liver.
Based off the allegation that the needle insertion was made by Dr. Stephen Breary, Dr. Svelena Dimitrova reported Dr. Breary to Cheshire Police for gross negligence manslaughter and perverting the course of justice. I believe the grounds for the call for perverting the course of justice allegation relate to the fact that the description of the needle insertion was not reported to the coroner at the time of the post-mortem, the fact that Dr. Breary's notes allegedly obscure the timing of the needle insertion, and plus his general conduct around the case. It was reported in Private Eye that months after Cheshire Police had done nothing to engage with Dr. Dimitrova's crime report, they had been told that they would be reported to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. So let's look on the website for the Independent Office for Police Conduct about the complaints procedure. Reading through it, quote, "Who deals with complaints about the police? Complaints are initially dealt with by the police force themselves. Each force has a department that makes sure that complaints are dealt with appropriately. These are usually called professional standards departments. We only independently investigate the most serious and sensitive matters. These are the type of matters that have the potential to affect public confidence in the police, such as deaths and serious injuries." So highlighting the bit where it says death and serious injuries there. Under normal circumstances, a specialist neonatology advisor to the Care Quality Commission sending in a crime report reporting a needle injury accelerating a baby's demise, leading to death, that would presumably trigger an instant referral to the Independent Office for Police Conduct and for the IOPC to start investigating themselves if the local police force didn't. The difference in this scenario is obviously that there has now been a conviction, so Cheshire Police can plausibly refuse to investigate Dr. Breary for gross negligence manslaughter on the basis that this baby was murdered by Lucy Letby. The last that I saw in Private Eye was that Cheshire Police had been told they would be reported to the Independent Office for Police Conduct if they didn't investigate Dr. Breary, but I'm not sure exactly where that went. This article in the Telegraph may have picked up the thread. Title: Lucy Letby Police decided she was guilty from the start. Reading through the first 3 sentences, quote, Cheshire Police are being urged to release strategic decision logs of the Lucy Letby investigation over fears they did not follow correct procedure. The force has been accused of fixating on Letby and of not following alternative lines of inquiry or challenging the narrative of doctors at the Countess of Chester Hospital or expert witnesses. Under the National Core Investigative Doctrine recommended by the College of Policing, forces are instructed to keep an open mind to avoid verification bias. The article then gets into some very stern criticism of the investigation by Dr. Steve Watts, the former Hampshire Assistant Chief Constable who drew up the national policy for investigating deaths in healthcare settings. Looking at the first sentence though, quote, Cheshire Police are being urged to release strategic decision logs of the Lucy Letby investigation over fears they did not follow correct procedure. That seems to be quite technically stated. The use of the term urged suggests that Cheshire Police still have some degree of control over the case. However, it appears pressure on them is mounting. It looks to be getting close to the point where the IOPC will start acting on complaints and may order Cheshire Police to send their strategic decision logs rather than ask them to investigate themselves. At this point in the video, I will say technically any citizen can raise a police misconduct complaint. Similarly, anyone can complain about the doctors involved in the case to the General Medical Council. Personally, it's not my style unless I believe I'm going to be making an argument that the regulators have not previously encountered. But if you are disturbed by this case, then it probably won't hurt sending a complaint. To use Dr. Dimitrova as an example of someone who has inside knowledge, even though I'm sure she's not the only medico-legal expert who has complained about the police conduct in this case. Reading through this excerpt from the Lucy Letby case, part 28, in Private Eye, quote, 2 new experts argue that page 97 of the evidence is a resuscitation sheet that clearly shows a large drop in haemoglobin after Dr. Stephen Breary inserted a needle in the region of the liver. However, Breary documented it in the notes as if the fall in haemoglobin had happened before the needle insertion. So there's a clear suggestion that Dr. Breary wrote fraudulent notes to throw people off the trail, which the jury were not made aware of. So bringing these complaints about police conduct back to the other subject of legal privilege. Rereading this quote from Mark Mcdonald, quote, while the police and prosecution are threatening her, which is what they've done, deliberately releasing it to the media, deliberately telling the Mail that they're looking at charging her for more murders, in her position, would you waive privilege? There's a logic to the idea that if Cheshire Police start feeling more heat from the Independent Office for Police Conduct, then they might feel the need to uphold better investigative standards and not merely seize on anything they can use. I'm not going to get into technical legal arguments too much myself here. I'm sure there are channels for that out there. From what I've seen, although there is doubt over Mark Mcdonald's suggestion that waiving legal privilege over trial tactics would then mean police and prosecutors would then have access to a significant amount of additional information, the idea has essentially been endorsed by a former judge and now King's Counsel called Simon Meyerson. Reading through this exchange on X, formerly Twitter, A legal blogger called Jolly Contrarian puts it to Meyerson, quote, "What is your view of her counsel's stated concern that agreeing a limited waiver to disclose rationale for trial tactics could open the floodgates to unlimited waiver of all Miss Letby's communications with counsel at any time?" Meyerson responds, "So it should. So it doesn't sound like a completely invalid concern that waiving legal privilege will then give police and prosecutors extra material to potentially twist if they are so inclined." For an alternative view, I will link this blog article by the Jolly Contrarian, which has been endorsed by criminal lawyers. He argues that Lucy Letby will only need to waive privilege to discuss trial tactics and to explain why medical experts were not called in defence at the first trial. As someone who thinks Lucy Letby is innocent, even though there are legal arguments that a waiver of privilege will only need to be confined to trial tactics and when the time is right, personally, and I'm guessing it's been discussed, a blanket waiver of privilege would send the message to the parents whose babies have died that she doesn't have anything to hide. Based off their public statements, some of these parents are some way off believing Lucy Letby is innocent, but it sounds like others have doubts. For instance, at the end of the Thirlwall inquiry, Peter Skelton, the lawyer for Family Group 1, said that after 10 years, the families had never been more confused. So in summary, on a closing note, the position by Lucy Letby's defence counsel is that she won't do a blanket waiver of privilege whilst Cheshire police are circling like sharks in the water. It does seem to me to be a valid concern, as they seem desperate to find the mud that will stick to make any awkward questions about their investigation go away.